Hey, welcome to the Omen Revelations podcast, where we talk about geek stuff. We talk about television. We talk about comics. We talk about films. We talk about geek holidays. One thing we like to talk about is writing comics and making comics and all the things we've learned along the way as creators of the Omen verse and Revelation comics. Today, we're going to be talking about one of the greatest and most prolific writer, director, producers that has ever helped to define a generation, and that would be John Hughes. John Hughes was, as is well known, a prolific screenwriter and a fast one, too. He whipped out hits like Planes, Trains, and Automobiles in the matter of a couple of days without breaking a sweat, much to the chagrin of Steve. Uh, I totally forgot his name. Steve, what's his, the actor, Steve Martin, who
Yeah.
spent a couple of years on his Roxanne script. But Hughes went on to write and produce and or direct some of the most successful comedy films of the 80s and 90s with Chris Columbus and John Candy, a close personal friend of Hughes, and the Brat Pack, of course, which consisted of the cast members of two specific films released in 1985, and that would be The Breakfast Club and St. Elmo's Fire. Although other actors are sometimes included, the core members are considered to be Emilio Estevez, Anthony Michael Hall, Rob Lowe, Andrew McCarthy, Demi Moore, Judd Nelson, and Molly Ringwald, who was Hughes's muse and the inspiration for many of Hughes's iconic characters that were played by her, and Ali Sheedy. Most of Hughes's work is also set in the Chicago metropolitan area.
Yeah, I always find it interesting when a creator builds an entire story world around these real places that they knew. I mean, you mainly see it with horror writers like Stephen King or M. Night Shyamalan, but it's really interesting that Hughes does this as well. And it definitely informs many of his films, but especially his teen movies that are set in these very realistic looking high schools in Chicago. I never have done this myself as a writer, but I find it striking when somebody else does. Um, Hughes's career is really interesting to me. He starts off as the writer for National Lampoon during its glory days, the magazine, when it was edited by P.J. O'Rourke. And then he ended up writing the first three National Lampoon movies, which is how he got into film. The first one, Animal House, I think a lot of people remember that one, really took off, but the second one didn't. But it took the third one, which was the original National Lampoon's Vacation, that became a huge hit, and that's the movie that put both John Hughes and Chevy Chase on the map after SNL, I believe. And it's really then that Hughes starts telling the stories that he's really interested in, which are the teen and family films. But speaking of that, the Brat Pack were a huge part of my childhood too, and I think part of the childhood of anybody who had been around at that time. And it's interesting that the term kind of started. I kind of found this out in like some of the notes in the Breakfast Club DVD, which is that there was a reporter who wanted to do a story on Emilio Estevez, and the whole thing ballooned after he started observing him with the rest of the Brat Pack. And the story that he did became pretty much a hit piece on the entire group, where he compared them to the Rat Pack of the 50s with Frank Sinatra and those people. The Rat Pack managed to turn this into a badge of honor in the end, and I would say it was ultimately. And those were just so many of the biggest actors of that generation, and some of them he hit it even bigger later in their careers, especially people like Demi Moore, and I would argue Rob Lowe as well. But I would say that even today, my guess is probably more people remember the Brat Pack than remember the Rat Pack. So that was an achievement. Yeah. Yeah, and as for Molly Ringwald, she was very much an inspiration for some of his best remembered teen films. Claire from The Breakfast Club, Andy Walsh, and all of them were really the right characters and the right stories that hit at the right time. And I would not be surprised if she was a subconscious influence on some of the stuff I've done. Yeah, she was very, very, very big in the '80s, and I think she stuck with a lot of '80s fans.
Oh, very, very true. Very true. The movies that meant the most to me and that I still watch almost yearly in most cases are movies like National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation, which came out in '89. Um, Weird Science, which came out in '85, and The Breakfast Club also came out in '85. Big one, Ferris Bueller's Day Off in '86. Planes, Trains, and Automobiles from '87. The Great Outdoors from '88. Dutch, 1991. Only the Lonely, also in 1991. Home Alone in 1990, and its sequel, Home Alone 2, Lost in New York in 1992. I'd like to take some time to talk about these actually.
Sure. I actually didn't know about a couple of them, and I really wasn't able to get my hands on them. I really tried really hard. I couldn't do it. So I can't talk about Only the Lonely or Dutch, but I can talk in pretty broad terms about some of the other ones. And I want to really start with Ferris Bueller Day Off. Because that one is my favorite John Hughes film of all time. And I'm not sure exactly why that is. I think some of it is that it's almost like a Looney Tunes story in live action, where you have this impossibly cool and clever trickster who always gets it over on Rooney, who is this dean of students who's trying to get him constantly for beating the system. The characters, though, are also so interesting. The situations are over the top and hilarious, and yet there's a humanity and sincerity to them underneath that. Cameron feels like a real believable contrast to Ferris. And the idea of taking a day to appreciate life is this theme that really clicks. And even if Ferris is a delinquent and a bit of a sociopath, he's just so likable, and he uses these schemes he pulls to make a worthwhile point.
Right? He definitely has a charm about it. You get why why people find why Ferris is so popular. You know, why there's a water tower up there that says "Save Ferris" on it, all of that.
I actually have a t-shirt with "Save Ferris."
Nice. Actually, Save Ferris was a punk band, wasn't it?
I wouldn't be surprised. It sounds like it would have been.
It is a great film, and you're not the only person I've heard say that it was their favorite. I remember talking with you before about Matthew Broderick's role as Ferris and how it's so unlike any other role he's ever played. I mean, in Ferris Bueller's Day Off, Broderick is the coolest kid in school, and he's smooth as hell. What's more is Broderick pulls it off so well. It just comes across naturally. But he's basically a dork in every other movie. I mean, maybe it's me, but I think that's a testament to Hughes's writing and directing that he could bring that out of him.
It very well could be, and it's true. I mean, if you look at War Games or Lady Hawk or something like that, you definitely see that the dorky bit. But Broderick is a really good actor with a strong background in theater, so Hughes provided some really good material to work with there. Ferris is a bit of an outlier, while also being quite possibly Broderick's most iconic character that he's ever played. It's a really odd juxtaposition.
Totally. Well, so since we've both seen and loved Ferris Bueller's Day Off, let's talk about our favorite scenes. Now, while there were several good ones in that film that make my favorite scene so good, my favorite scene is actually at the end when the principal has to take the bus. Jeffrey Jones really shows his disdain for even having to be in that situation without a shoe, I might add. And the scene is really topped off by that girl offering him warm gummy bears from her pocket.
Yeah.
What's your favorite scene?
Yeah, and all this with "Oh Yeah" playing in the background. It's great. Jeffrey Jones is so easy to dislike, and he really is funny as a comic antagonist. I mean, he's smarmy and a creep in many ways, and he goes so far that he deserves his karmic punishment in this film. I will also add that for all Rooney goes on about obeying the rules, he's so overzealous that he commits criminal trespass and harasses the Bueller family in their home just to prove that Ferris is out skipping. He is a great love-to-hate character. I adore him. My favorite scene from the film, there are a lot of them. I mean, there's obviously, the whole Dankeschön thing that he did, but probably the moment for me is probably when the Ferrari falls to its doom after Cameron takes out all of his repressed anger at his dad out on the car. I mean, it's just both hilarious and cathartic. I mean, it's a shocking, powerful, and cathartic moment, and it helps Cameron grow as a character, while also being really funny. And ultimately, Cameron's decision to take responsibility for causing the damage to the car after Ferris tries to take the blame, I think really shows where their friendship had grown, and also how Cameron had grown up because of their experience together. Is wonderful.
Totally. That is a pivotal scene for Cameron's character, and one I didn't get much as a kid. Honestly, there was just, I mean, maybe punishment went a little different in my house, but there's just no way I would have deliberately got myself in so much trouble. But
Mhm.
watching it as an adult, I can see that while it was crazy, it ultimately allowed Cameron to stand up to his father, even if it did come with a healthy dose of punishment. I mean, you know that getting grounded was probably the nicest thing Cameron's overbearing father did about destroying his beloved car.
Oh, I have no doubt he probably would have been grounded for life for that at least. But I mean, he was a great character, and you can't help but love a guy like Cameron. But I mean, that really is the strength of Hughes's writing. That even in the really funny stuff, he had a lot of heart and a lot of humanity, and we also see this in The Breakfast Club. Now, I find it a bit of a slow burn film at first, but I get why people love it. The characters are all really eccentric with depth to them as we see the movie go on. And even Judd Nelson's character, who I really did not like for most of the movie, ended up becoming more and more appealing to me by the end of the film. And some of them had showed depth I hadn't expected. Ali Sheedy was the good girl in a lot of films I remember her being in. War Games is an example of that. So it was really fun watching her play this weird mousy girl. I wasn't into some of the romances, but I ended up liking the kids and seeing where they came from and how they ended up getting there.
Right. It's definitely a journey kind of movie. Movies in general were a big thing in my family, and Hughes was a big one for us, and ultimately for millions, I think, that came from the Gen X and baby boomer generations. We watched several of the movies Hughes worked on pretty regularly, but The Breakfast Club is one movie that stands out above all the others. Not just for how many times we watched it, but for the sheer number of quotable lines from it. I mean, I can basically give you that movie verbatim. I've seen it so many times. Half of that script was a regular part of my family's dialogue. Uh, to this day, it remains my favorite among those films written and directed by Hughes. The setting was brilliant. The Brat Pack was perfect. Hughes wrote an amazing script, and the soundtrack is one of the best soundtracks ever made for a movie. Despite the film being about teenagers, I think there is someone in The Breakfast Club that everyone can relate to, no matter how old they are, what social group they're in. You know how fans from the Friends TV show would decide whether they were a Monica or a Rachel or a Ross or a Chandler. Well, for The Breakfast Club, I was John Bender with a hint of Brian Johnson. How about you, Steve?
Yeah, I think when I look at this, I kind of have to look back, because like you, I really never got into trouble that much, and I certainly didn't get into detention very often. So the weird thing is I don't think I was any of them, at least to the level that I could identify with most of them. I would say probably I lean most to Brian in some respects, if only because he seemed to be one of the most responsible and willing to be friends with the other groups. I didn't care about cliques in high school. I really didn't. And I was willing to be friends with people who weren't popular, and I didn't care about the consequences. It didn't always work out in my favor, but it was something that I had tried to do. At the same time, I couldn't imagine doing some of the things that Brian did, and I wasn't into science or really feeling the need that I had to be perfect all the time. I couldn't stand Bender for the longest time, at least until he gave himself up for the group in the middle. That was when he earned my respect. I didn't really connect to Claire's experience, obviously, and I wasn't a jock. So, I mean, I was sometimes misunderstood the way that Ali Sheedy's character was, but in different ways. But I admit I wasn't the typical teenager, and I was a bit mature for my age, so that could just be me. Um, that kind of leads me into the discussion of like one that I had recently discovered that I'm kind of glad that you introduced me to, and that was Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. This movie really surprised me when I finally saw it, and I think the appeal for me is that Steve Martin and John Candy are just perfect comic foils in it. Neil Page is wound even tighter than Cameron, if that's even possible. So that bounces off the freewheeling Del Griffith absolutely perfectly. It's a natural frustration of a trip going wrong and being stuck with this weird guy you hope you never have to deal with, and then it's trying to get home on the worst day of your life. It's just great. Some of the jokes are a little bit telegraphed, but I love this movie because those characters and those actors are perfect.
I never seen a guy picked up by his testicles before.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
The films with John Candy in them were my family's favorite for the most part. John Candy was really funny, and he had a very natural talent for comedic timing. But what makes you fall in love with the guy, at least for me, is the warmth he brings to his roles. You talked about Hughes uh, adding heart to his movies, even those the most outlandish ones. And John Candy, in a lot of ways, was that heart for me in those movies that he was in. John Candy's character. Uh, his characters always felt fleshed out and three-dimensional. They brought honesty and heart to characters that I think would have been much more shallow in the hands of other comedic actors. I think that's why Hughes and Columbus worked with him so many times. But there were three John Candy characters I identified with on a personal level. The first John Candy character would be Del Griffith from Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, who I think a lot of those who have been on their own and trying to make friends can relate to. There was this very real moment when Del was sitting outside the motel in the burnt up car talking to himself that really got to me. I've been in Del's shoes, cursing myself for doing things that may have had good intentions, but ultimately led to me being alone again. It really made that moment where Neil calls him inside a big moment in the film, the turning point in Neil and in Del's relationship, for sure. Yep. The second would be Danny Muldoon from Only the Lonely, which I know you haven't seen, but you should. Which I relate to a lot, being Irish and having a mother who is antiquated in her thinking and views. The scene where Danny's mother and I think a lot of people can relate to it is Danny's insecurities when it comes to dating and moving on. The last but not least of these characters would be Chester Chet Ripley from The Great Outdoors, who was the kind of father I wanted to be.
Mm-hmm. John Candy is an actor I really love as well, and it's a shame that he left the world too soon. I remember that Vince Vaughn had once said that had Candy been alive longer, Hughes probably would have directed more films. I don't know if that's true or not, but I mean, I like to believe that it is, and they'd certainly have made many great films together if they both had more time. I didn't see a lot of Candy's films with Hughes, but I enjoyed Candy and other things. Brewster's Millions comes immediately to mind. But I didn't grow up with their collaborations, so here you probably could say more than I could. But I will say that I do generally agree about Chet. I did see Great Outdoors when I was younger, and I find that he's really earnest and trying to do his best as a husband and a father, and he's very likable. But I will say that Del Griffith, I agree with you, is easily the best Hughes Candy character that I've seen. I could be missing things as far as I know, though. But I do like that Del tries his best, but he has no impulse control, especially over his mouth. And he has no idea when he's being annoying or unintentionally offensive to somebody. And sometimes Neil really is right about Del and his shortcomings. And Del is so emotionally sensitive that he doesn't take it well. But on the other hand, Neil can very often be a cynical jerk. And he needs somebody like Del to call him out when he's acting like one. Candy really seems to really excel when it comes to these well-meaning but eccentric and funny characters. But Del probably is the most interesting. And I can't help but wonder how much of it is the whole friendly Canadian thing that Candy pulls off so well.
Yeah. You're like a chatty Cathy doll, but I wouldn't pull out the string. You would. It'd just be like, wow. Yeah. Yep. Actually, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles is one of those that I watch annually in November. In fact, it's just not Thanksgiving until I do. I think it works so well for me because, well, I would like to. I'm not the best candidate for doing this in real life. I love a story where people who don't normally get along or would even be enemies normally actually grow close. It's the interactions between Neil and Del that really have endeared the movie to me. My favorite scene in a movie are the two hotel scenes. The first for Neil's frustrated rant, and of course the pillows. And the second because, like Neil says, it was like they were at summer camp. I mean, tell me it didn't crack you up to imagine the waffle burns on Dale's butt from the hot seats.
Oh man, that was great. The car catching fire earlier in the movie, it took me by surprise, even though I knew in going in that Neil was going to lose the credit cards. The moment that he put them in the glove compartment, I'm like, okay, they're going to be gone. But I really love the reconciliation between them later in the second hotel room scene, where Neil decides that he can't let Del freeze to death in the car. It shows that they really were friends at that point, and that Neil was willing to put his own ego aside to help Del, even if it might cost him some inconvenience. And their relationship is in a very different place between the two hotel room scenes. And I think that's a strength of Hughes as a character writer. Now, with The Great Outdoors, I would say it was okay. I remember seeing it back in the day, but and I watched it a little bit before, but it didn't stick out to me like a lot of other Hughes films did. I don't know why. I will say that I like Dan Aykroyd and I like John Candy together, especially together. But it's fun to see, and it's fun to see Aykroyd play the weirder character for once. He does like these really offbeat characters. The premise of the camping trip gone wrong and being stuck with that annoying relative is a good one, but it's just not one that I take to remember, and it's probably just because of my own experiences.
Yeah, I will admit the Great Outdoors is not an exceptional movie. I'll give you that, but some movies and shows just have that nostalgia goggles thing going for them, and they feel like home. You know what I mean? The Great Outdoors, because we went camping so much when I was younger, it is that movie for me. I'm just blind to its imperfections. Besides, as you said, the interactions between Aykroyd and Candy were awesome.
Yeah. I do agree that the nostalgia aspect is probably where the charm of the movie comes from. I think the problem for me is that I never actually did the whole camping thing, so maybe that's why I don't have as much of a connection to it. But but I will say that probably a movie that probably a lot of people did connect to, especially teenage boys, was Weird Science. And I think it's because it's basically the teenage nerd's fantasy writ large. I mean, the way it's done, it's goofy and ridiculous, especially by today's standards where you're looking at how things work. But I think overall, the movie holds together because it resonates with a lot of young boy in that position. Anthony Michael Hall probably will always be remembered as the nerdy kid, but he did those characters really well. And I have to say, you can't go wrong with anything Bill Paxton and Robert Downey Jr. Was in, especially later on. Anything those guys do is going to end up being amazing. So, and another film that to look at would be National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation, which I know you've mentioned before. And it's a classic Christmas movie for a lot of reasons. I think a lot of people have known a Clark Griswold, that guy who just goes completely all in on Christmas every year and is just crazy about it. But it's also a movie that shows, I think, why the holiday matters and what it means without doing it in a Hallmark Channel way. There's an earnestness and a realness while also making fun of everything that's ridiculous and frustrating about Christmas. And that's not an easy balance to pull off at all.
Right. I agree. And plus, it gave us the great line, "Hallelujah, holy shit."
Yeah.
Like Planes, Trains, and Automobiles is for my Thanksgiving, National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation is an essential part of my Christmas for me. There are so many parts of that movie I love. It would be hard to center on a favorite. But while Clark is hilarious and has all of the quotable lines from the movie, my favorite character in that movie was Cousin Eddie. That dude was so off the wall that he is hilarious to watch. Like emptying his Blackwater tank into the sewer outside, just like shitter's full, no big deal. Besides, how many guys do you know would kidnap your boss for you?
Not too many. I will say that guy was something else. Most people probably have that one bizarre or eccentric relative, and Randy Quaid just pulled it off so well. There were a lot of really great moments in the film, but I have to give it to the squirrel chase. I can't say that I envy any of the animal handlers in that film or in that scene, and that's just the parts with the dog.
Right.
But speaking of Christmas, I don't think you can mention the holidays without talking about the Home Alone series. I did relate to Kevin a little bit at times. Not that because I was abandoned by my parents at Christmas time or anything like that, but just in struggling with the good and bad of having the house to yourself at a young age, which did occasionally happen. At the same time, Home Alone was just was another comedy that had a bit of a live action Looney Tunes feel, especially with the two thieves, the wet bandits, and Kevin just coming up with these elaborate traps to keep them out. I do think it's one of those series you can't do for too long without wondering why the parents aren't facing child neglect charges. But the first one definitely had that huge charm that makes you overlook those questions.
Home Alone and 1 and 2 are
Mhm.
also essential viewings for my December. But I gotta say, I mean, have you ever watched the making of docs that they did for the first Home Alone movie? All those falls on that hard ground, the tumbles down the stairs, all of that basically were done basically without safety precautions by a couple of very dedicated stuntmen. Macaulay Culkin may have had the leading role in that movie, but if you ask me, the stars of that movie were the stuntmen.
Yeah, I can understand that for sure. I hadn't actually seen those documentaries, at least as far as I can remember, but I will agree those stuntmen more than earned their money. They earned hazard pay in addition to that. Those movies were physically demanding, and selling all the horrible things Kevin does to the wet bandits probably took its toll after a while. But as one last side note, I will say that I love the clever little references in these films. One that I didn't realize for years is that the name of Joe Pesci's character in those films is Harry Lime. Harry Lime is the villain of the classic film The Third Man, plays by Orson Welles. And if you haven't seen it, see it. It is very, very good. John Hughes really knew his classic films, and his love of classic film, I would say, is all over the Home Alone series.
I did not catch that name reference at all, but it does make sense. I think I might have to keep an eye out for those movie references next time I watched it.
Mhm.
Well, that about wraps things up for our John Hughes discussion. Thanks for hanging out with us, and we'll see you next time. Wait, you're still here? It's over. Go home.
This has been the Omen Revelations podcast. This has been Steve Sellers and Michael Nunneley with Omen Comics and Revelation Comics, where we offer a wide variety of independent comics in all kinds of different genres, ranging from fantasy to superhero war comics, and the Omenverse, which is our major home. So please, if you want to support us, you can find our books on Amazon, Global Comics, and Comixology, and wherever comics are sold. I hope you'll continue to support us, and until next time, we'll see you in the Omenverse.